What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official prediction on the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup between the number 8 seeded Ohio State Buckeyes and the number 1 seeded Oregon Ducks. Of course, a rematch from the regular season between these two teams coming up on January the 1st, the first game of 2025, and of course this quarterfinal matchup will be taking place at the Rose Bowl. So I will be giving you a full preview of this game, giving you both teams' stats and taking a look at both of these teams' previous games that they played already. And we'll talk about those games, and then I'll give you my official prediction at the end of this video of how I think the game's going to go down. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to do that with all the quarterfinal games. We'll start with this one, and then we got the other three coming up, throughout the rest of the week, and then also going into the weekend as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into it here with Ohio State and Oregon. These are the stats here for both of these teams. We'll start here with Ohio State. You look at the points per game for this team, Ohio State averaging 36 points per game. So this is an offense that can score points. We know about that already. Ohio State really hasn't had an explosive offensive performance, ever since that Tennessee game. They came into that game with not really an explosive offensive performance, probably since the Purdue game where they did shut out Purdue, even though the Boilermakers were not really that good this year. But they had a great offensive performance this past weekend against Tennessee. They scored 42 points in that game, so that points per game number, it's gone up just a little bit in my opinion. In offensive yards per game, this team averaging 427.3 yards of total offense this year. So yeah, this is a really good Ohio State offense. We know a lot about them. They can score points, and it really hasn't been like that for the last couple years, but it feels like Ohio State's offense got back where they used to be from this past weekend against Tennessee. They put on a great number of performance there in the total yards per game. Passing yards per game, 259.2 yards of passing yards per game. You look at Will Howard, his stats on the year, the quarterback for the Buckeyes, 3,171 yards of passing, 29 touchdown passes on the year, and then 9 interceptions. So yeah, Will Howard has had a lot of ups and downs this year, but he played his best game, in my opinion, this past weekend against Tennessee. Made some really good throws down the field. In rushing yards per game, this team is about average at running the football, 168.2 yards of rushing on the ground. So not an explosive running game that Ohio State has. This is more of like a passing attack team. But they got some really good running backs in the backfield. You got Travion Henderson, who's coming off a great game against Tennessee. And then, of course, you got Quayshawn Judkins. 157 carries on the year, 839 yards, and then 10 rushing touchdowns. He wasn't really big against Tennessee this past weekend, but I feel like he can have a big game here against Oregon coming up on January the 1st. Passing yards allowed on the defensive side of the football, Ohio State giving up 141.2 yards in the secondary allowed in the passing game. Yeah, that's a really good number. This is one of the top secondary teams in the country. And then rushing yards allowed, they're also pretty good at stopping the run game, giving up just 101.1 yards of rushing allowed per game. They gave up a little bit of rushing yards against Tennessee, but other than that, this is a really good defensive line that can stop the running game pretty well. Then you look at offensively and defensively here in the rankings. Ohio State 32nd on offense in the country, but they did not look like that in the Tennessee game. They looked like one of the top offenses in the country this past weekend instead of being like 32nd in the country. But yeah, we've seen Ohio State's offense up and down pretty much all throughout the year, but they were definitely not up and down in that game this past weekend. And then defensively, they have one of the top defenses in the country, so no surprise there. Moving on to Oregon stats, this team averaging 35.9 points per game. So yeah, this is also an offense that can score on the offensive side of the football. Offensive yards per game total, they're averaging 449.8 yards per offense this year. So yeah, a little bit better than Ohio State. This is also a team that is really explosive on the offensive side of the football, especially in the passing game. You look at 278 yards per passing. Dillon Gabriel, of course, a lot of experience as a quarterback, 6 years of college football. 3,558 yards of passing, 28 touchdowns, and then 6 interceptions. So he's been taking care of the football pretty well. And then also he was a Heisman finalist, so congratulations to him. Rushing yards per game also about pretty average, so both of these teams are just pretty average at running the football. 171.8 yards per rushing on the ground for Oregon. But they got a 1,000-yard rusher. They got Jordan James. He's a pretty good player at running the football. 226 carries on the year, 1,053 yards, and then 15 touchdowns. I should say 1,253 yards, and then 15 rushing touchdowns. So he has been really good as a running back for Oregon. And then on the defensive side of the football, in the secondary, this team giving up 175.7 yards per passing. That's not a really bad number there at giving up in passing yards allowed. This is one of the top 10 secondaries in the country. I believe they're like 8th in the country on secondary. And their rushing yards allowed, this team also just about average at, stopping the run game. It's not better than Ohio State's, but it's 126.2 yards of rushing allowed on the ground. And then you look at the rankings for Oregon, 14th on offense. And then defensively, they're 9th on defense. So you look at the stat comparisons here, Oregon definitely has an advantage in the total yards per game. That doesn't really matter, though. These are two really good offensive teams that are pretty even, in my opinion. Passing yards per game is pretty even. Rushing yards is also pretty even. So I think both offenses are definitely pretty even. I would definitely give the defensive advantage to Ohio State just because they have a better secondary, and they're also one of the top defenses in the country. But I would say both teams are pretty even on both sides of the football, especially on offense. Let's now get into the full preview of this matchup. So this is going to be a college football playoff quarterfinal matchup. It's going to be held on January the 1st at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So the first game of 2025. This game is actually going to be on ESPN. It's not on ABC, but you look at the spread there going in favor of Ohio State by 2.5. That doesn't really surprise me that much, to be honest, because I thought Oregon, after they beat Ohio State in the first matchup, I feel like Oregon probably would have been favored here because they are undefeated and also the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. But yeah, Ohio State is favored even as a number 8 seed. I think Ohio State definitely is a better, team compared to like their number seed and everything. They're definitely probably like a more talented team than their number 8 seed. And looking at the over and under, it's at 55.5. So this game can go two different ways. It could be a low-scoring defensive battle, or it could be an offensive battle between these two really good offensive teams. You look at Ohio State, they've already beaten Tennessee in the college football playoff round 1 matchup. They played really well in that game. It looked like the old Ohio State team that we saw from the C.J. Stroud era, because last year's offense wasn't really that explosive, but this year it's been a little up and down. But they were so explosive this past weekend against Tennessee, even playing at home. That kind of gave them the advantage there in that game. Yeah, these Ohio State receivers stepped up as well. And then for Oregon on the other side, they beat Ohio State in that first matchup back on October the 12th, 32-31. Again, this is a revenge game here for the Buckeyes, but Oregon is undefeated. There is a lot of pressure here for Oregon, in my opinion, because they are the number 1 seed, and they haven't lost a game, and they haven't played a game since back on December the 7th. So once they get into this game on January the 1st, it's going to be feeling like a month since Oregon has played a game. So yeah, that's crazy, and that could be probably a disadvantage here for Oregon because they haven't played a game in a while. And they also had that first round bye, so that might be a disadvantage. Ohio State's already played a game already, and I feel like they'll be ready for this one because it's a revenge game again for Ohio State. They lost the first matchup 32-31. Matchup predictor does favor Ohio State. They give them about a 53.6% chance of getting revenge on Oregon and moving on to the semifinals. And then for Oregon, they give them about a 46.4% chance. So the matchup predictor in percentages is not really that far between these two teams. And again, the spread going in favor of Ohio State. Remember, this game is going to be on ESPN. It's the Rose Bowl. So it's kind of like a home game here for Oregon. It's out west, but Ohio State fans have been to the Rose Bowl before. They were there a couple years ago, I believe, or actually like 3 years ago against Utah, and a lot of Ohio State fans showed up for that New Year's Six Bowl. So, again, spread going in favor of Ohio State by 2.5. Again, it doesn't really surprise me there just because based off of the performance that they had from this past weekend. All right, let's now move on to both teams' previous games from 2024. First off, for Ohio State, again, they come in with a record of 11-2. First off, they defeated Purdue back on November 9th, 45-0. Defeated Northwestern on the road, 31-7 on November 16th. They blew out Indiana. Indiana was already eliminated from the college football playoff as well. They lost to Notre Dame 27-17 this past Friday, but they blew out Indiana back on November 23rd, 38-15. Lost to Michigan, though, in rivalry weekend, of course. There was a lot of doubt about this Ohio State team after the loss to Michigan. They lost that game 13-10. But look at what they did to Tennessee. They won 42-17. And again, that offense was just so much, looked like the Ohio State offense that we were kind of expecting to see all season long. It hasn't been that way, probably since the Purdue game was probably their best offensive performance. But this was definitely against a very talented team in Tennessee. I would say their offensive performance against Indiana was also pretty good, and then also Northwestern, even though Northwestern's not a great team either. But against Tennessee, to have to do that against a very talented defense at Tennessee, yeah, that's really good. So they beat Tennessee in that first round college football playoff game, and again, that game was just this past Friday, December 21st. They won that game 42-17. Moving on to Oregon, they come in with a record of 13-0. Again, they're undefeated, the only undefeated team in college football, and in definitely Power 4. First off, they defeated Michigan 38-17 back on November 2nd. Defeated Maryland at home 39-18 on November 9th. Had that scare against Wisconsin on the road 16-13. They won that game. They were lucky to win that one, to be honest, to stay undefeated. And then they had a bye week and they defeated rival Washington in rivalry weekend November 30th, 49-21. And then this is the last game they played. December the 7th, they played in the Big Ten Championship against Penn State, and they won that game 45-37. It wasn't an easy game, but Oregon was able to come out with the victory. It was because their offense was just too explosive against the Penn State defense. So that's the previous game comparisons here. Let's now get into my prediction here for this official game. So again, it's Ohio State and Oregon in the college football playoff quarterfinals. It is a rematch, of course, from the regular season. This is definitely going to be a game where Ohio State definitely would like to have revenge on. But for Oregon, they're trying to stay undefeated. They're trying to go undefeated here the rest of the way. Again, they had that bye week in the first round. Is that going to be a little bit of a disadvantage here for the Ducks because Ohio State's already played a game? And, Oregon's almost had like a full month off. Once they get into this game, it's going to be on January the 1st. It's going to feel like Oregon has not played a game in over a month. So I just feel like that could be a disadvantage here for Oregon. And again, I think Ohio State definitely will be ready for this one. Look, I know Oregon has been very talented all season long, but I feel like the Buckeyes are just going to be ready to go, and I feel like they'll want this game more because Ohio State definitely looked dangerous against Tennessee. I feel like if they keep that momentum up, I feel like there's just going to, really be this disadvantage here for Oregon. So with that being said, I think this is a really high-scoring game. Just like the first game, I think it really is a game that comes down to the wire. I think a turnover probably is the difference here, but I got to go with Buckeyes. I think Ohio State gets revenge here on Oregon in the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup in the Rose Bowl. And I think Ohio State, it's not really technically an upset because Ohio State is favored, but it is an upset because Oregon is the top team and the top seed in the college football playoff. But I got Ohio State winning 38-34. Again, this is a game that probably does come down to the wire. But again, I think a turnover probably will be the difference. It probably does come down to who has the most turnovers at the end of the game. And whoever makes the most mistakes probably is going to be the loser of this game. So Ohio State, I think they win the revenge game 38-34. And they will move on to the semifinals of the college football playoff. So that's my official prediction here on the college football playoff quarterfinal matchup between Ohio State and Oregon. Again, my pick is the Ohio State Buckeyes. Do you guys agree or disagree? Give me your prediction for this game down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.